Okay. Changing the state of your consciousness is changing the state of your consciousness by external means is something you're probably familiar with. Usually these means are chemical means like drinking something, eating something, or smoking something. Mitch Altman, inventor of TV Begun, will tell us today what can be achieved using sound and light. Have fun.
Oh, hi, everyone. Hope you're all having a great time. So, made this brain machine thing, and thought it would be fun to share it with other people. So, brain machine, how many people here have tried it? A lot of you folks. Yeah, most people have. I guess most people seem to like it. Yeah, it's kind of weird. These things have been around for a long time, but I made mine just for Make Magazine, and it was way more effective than I thought it would be. I've been working on one that's way complex, and this is a very simplified version, and I was thinking, maybe it would just be something that's kind of fun, and it is, but it seems to be very effective. Thousands of people have tried it in my presence, and many, many thousands more around the world, and it's just amazing how much fun people have had with it and how well it's worked for them. So, but what is this brain machine thing? So it's got lights in front of your eyes. You've probably seen some people looking like zombies or whatever with these blinking lights, and the graphics were really important for enhancing that effect. And then just pulsing sound on your ears, and it's playing a brainwave sequence that is recorded in the microcontroller. And it's the same sequence you would have, simplified form, if you would take an EEG, which is used for measuring brainwaves, of a person meditating for about 10 minutes and then coming out. When that is presented to someone else's brain through sound and light, their brain synchronizes to that, and then they experience that 10-minute meditation. And there's this fancy name for synchronizing brainwave frequencies. It's called entrainment. But it's basically just synchronizing to an external source. So just one thing, I'm not an expert on brain physiology or brain waves and all this. I've just been fascinated with it since I was an undergrad. I took a lot of classes in psychology, even though I'm totally an electronics geek, computer geek. But I've always been fascinated with mind. Like, what is mind? Where is it? Does it really exist? Do we just believe it exists? But whatever. Something about it, it's just something we all think we have, and we don't really know anything about it. So, but we can play with it. As our introducer, what's your name again? What's your name again? Thilo. As Thilo pointed out, many of you have probably been experienced with altering your state of consciousness by various other external means. I have my experience with it as well. But there's so many other ways to do it, and people have been doing this for a very long time. Before I want to get into the history, but just briefly about brainwave. Brains put out a spectrum of frequencies all the way from near DC up to about 100 hertz. And that's divided up somewhat arbitrarily, but somewhat not, into 5 bands, kind of like AM radios used to have before they went digital. The lower part is delta, which is associated with deep unconscious, but also you can measure when people are freaking out and saying, oh, wow, I figured something out. Delta waves are sort of cruising in there. Theta is pretty deep subconscious. That's associated more with sleep. Alpha is the spacey between sleep and wake that you feel like when you're going to sleep or waking up or when you're daydreaming. Or when you're watching TV. There's only one activity that produces in a human being just alpha waves. In 2 million years, only one device has been able to make people do only alpha waves, and that's television. And that's associated with just passivity. So imagine that when all those commercials and marketing is going right into your brain. So don't get me going on TV. Beta is when you're totally conscious, thinking, and when you're thinking externally, focusing externally. There's another part that's not all that well known right now, and that's gamma waves. It's the highest part, and it's associated with perception and often anxiety. So we'll be getting back to these a little later. We just talk a little bit about a brainwave sequence. You don't have to really be a scientist to create your own brainwave sequence if you build your own brainwave machine. Just thinking about what each brainwave type is associated with, you can create your own sequences. So meditation is something I've done since I was 13, and I think it's just great. And one of the reasons I made the brain machine is to have a fun way for people to check it out, see what you think. But a meditation sequence, you start when you're awake, and then add in a little bit of alpha, get you kind of dreamy and spacey. Start getting the beta a little bit down, and more alpha, get really spaced out, and then start pumping in a little bit of theta, less on the beta, and the theta is deep subconscious. But you don't want to bring the beta all the way down because you want to stay awake. And then hover around back and forth with alpha and theta, spacey, subconscious, woo, wow, yeah, that's cool. So then when you're down way into theta, bring the beta way down, just bring it up a little bit now and again so you don't fall asleep, and then pulse some delta. And a lot of you in here have really started drooling when the delta started with the brainwave machines, and that's usually when I take your picture. So when you're doing that with meditation, you hang out there a while. It's really interesting. With meditation, you're looking somewhat like you're asleep, and yet there's beta happening, so you're awake, and the alpha kind of bridges the gap, and you're somewhat aware of things that are normally subconscious or unconscious. And then when you come back up, reverse the process, you can bring something of your subconscious up with you, hopefully feeling really fabulous. So inventing is kind of a weird process. It seems that when you think of an idea, someone has already thought of it. That always happens. I was lying in my room meditating, wondering, what should I build next? I want to come up with a cool project, and I was just laying there and zoning out, and suddenly, poof, this idea came into my head. And I was thinking, what would happen if you played a brainwave sequence into someone else's brain, or my brain? And would your brain sync up to that? And if you did sync up with it, would you actually experience what you would be experiencing if you came up with those brainwaves yourself? And the answer to all that turns out to be yes. But getting back to the inventing thing, I went to research the answer to these questions, and I found out that people have been doing this stuff since the 30s. So it's just back then they didn't have microcontrollers to make it easy, and there's all these companies out there selling these things, but they're super expensive. And there's all this kind of woo stuff around them, and they're making all these claims of fantastic healing experiences, whatever. And maybe some of it's okay, but it kind of scares away a lot of people. This stuff, it's not, I don't know, it's just, it's based on a lot of research that's been done. It works on most people. Their brains do sync up to this stuff. But as for all the claims and whatever, I don't know, like, maybe build one yourself and try it out and see what it does for you. Just one more thing with inventing. There's only been one thing that I've ever come up with an idea that no one else seems to have thought up before, and that's TV be gone, and I don't think that'll ever happen to me again. So I'd like it to. So just a bit of history about this stuff. Sound is really the first way that people have synchronized their brains to go to an altered state. And ritual dancing, drummer circles, and all that is usually at theta waves, but also sometimes alpha. So beta is happening automatically because people are dancing, and they're not falling asleep while they're dancing usually, unless they're doing, unless someone just did. So yeah, that. You've probably all experienced that if you've ever danced around a drum circle, or sometimes even a discos. So, but in the 2nd century, there's this guy Ptolemy who started actually purposely pulsing light because he noticed he had a feeling of euphoria when he would sit behind a spinning wheel that had a light on the other side, and that was producing alpha for him. Skip ahead to the 20s when we have more of our more familiar technology of high tech. There's a guy, Hans Berger, who he's the first one to use electroencephalogram for measuring the brain waves of human beings. Electroencephalogram at that time, EEG for short, was brand new, and it was really cool. He was the first one to categorize brainwave types, and they're the ones we're still using today. Alpha was the first one he saw, so he named it alpha. It's the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Beta was the second, and theta and delta in that order. That's why they're named that. So in the 30s, there was a guy who heard a lecture by Hans Berger, and he got into this stuff. Did tons of research in the field. He's a really interesting character. He wrote an incredible book called The Living Brain, where he talks about his, at that time in the 50s, 20 or so years of research. And he used flickering lights to synchronize his subjects, research subjects' brains, so he could get sort of a base of where they're at. Usually he would put them into alpha waves. Incidentally, he also did a lot of work with robots. So back in the 30s and 40s, he's building these robots out of mechanical stuff and tubes, just so, because he was really interested in how brains function. He wanted to see physiologically this brain thing creates all these diverse sets of behaviors. And how does that go about? So he modeled behavior of animals and built these robots to see if his model really worked. And it turns out that his robots really looked like insects crawling around, or behaved like insects crawling around. Yeah, that's a really cool book if you're interested in that. We'll skip ahead to the 50s. There's this guy, a beat guy, who most people haven't heard of unless they're into this specifically. This kind of stuff specifically. He was a friend of William S. Burroughs and Ginsberg and all these guys. His name's Brion Gysin. And he took the work of Gray, Walter, and purposely, with the help of one of his friends who worked out the math, created this weird thing here. This is a dream machine. It's meant to be on a turntable that plays records at 78 RPM, and you put that light hanging down in the middle, and with your eyes closed right in front of it, just stare at it, and it creates alpha waves with the light blinking through it. There are a lot of people who've come up with versions that work on 45 RPM, since it's hard to get a 78 nowadays, and people are still building this thing. In fact, this was at a party I went to just a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco. Let's skip ahead to the 70s. There's a lot of research that's been going on, and it really started to take off in the 70s. There was a lot of work showing that it would help people with ADHD, and also help people quit drugs like heroin and in some cases speed. It was also in the decade where there was the first use of brain machines it started happening lots and lots in popular culture, with partly due to the Dream Machine making it popular. But then in the 70s, we had technology, so we had all these mind machines coming out commercially. The first patent came out in 1974 by some trippy prof at a New York, I think it was New York City College, or was it SUNY? Anyways, he had the first patent, and that's a picture of it here. In 1974, you can see the happy face here of the person using it. And also, it's the first use of brain machines in discos. It was kind of an external brain machine. They're pulsing sound at theta and alpha and pulsing lights at those same frequencies, and people would trip out and dance all night. In the 80s, there's more medical studies, but it became way more popular in mass culture due to this guy Hutchinson reading a book called Mega Brain Power. And that book it makes a lot of claims that are pretty fascinating. Whether they're true or not, who knows? You can try it for yourself and see what you think. It's a pretty interesting book, though, to read, from anthropological perspective, for sure. So, let's see. I'm as tired as all of you people, so I have to look at my notes. One thing, too, just epileptic people and blinking lights don't go together. So just that cautionary note. If you have ever had a seizure, you should really not use the blinking light part. But with brain machines, the blinking lights are powerful. The pulsing sound is powerful. You can use one or the other. Both are much more powerful, but it works with just the sound if you do have a problem with sensitivity to the lights. So, jump to 2007. I wrote this article for Make Magazine. And Make Magazine, I don't know if you're familiar, it's just a really cool do-it-yourself magazine, and it's just great ethos of doing stuff yourself rather than just going out and buying some ready-made thing. And ADHD, that's drawing a blank. It's when you're hyperactive. So there you go, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And for people who are truly ADHD, there's so many people who are diagnosed as ADHD who aren't, that usually it means their kid is, it's really kids, their kid is drinking too much Coca-Cola with sugar and caffeine, and they're watching too much TV, and their attention span is like nil. So, yeah, and so here we have all these people getting pumped up with drugs who really should just stop doing the drugs they're doing and do something better. But yeah, so ADHD, don't get me going on that. And Make Magazine, anyways, I wrote this article for it, and it's the first time I used an Atmel chip. Atmel chip microcontroller chip. It was really easy to use, and it was really just so fun to learn. I wanted to make it really simple for people to build, so I started it with a kit that already works, made by Lady Ada, also known as Lemore Freed, and she has ladyada.net, really cool website full of all these projects, all of it open source. So this mini POV kit is one of her kits, and it's almost a really crude development environment for this Atmel microcontroller chip. And I love microcontrollers. You can do so much with them. Starting with basically the same hardware, you can make some, a few hardware modifications and your own firmware, and you end up with something totally different. Check out what the mini POV does if you haven't seen it already. Where can we, I don't know, can you see this? Is it too bright? So this is the mini POV kit if you make it on your own. If you just do what I said, a little bit of hardware modification and make some new firmware for it, you end up with something totally different, which is these. So you've probably seen that already. Yeah, so the article turned out to be way popular, and it also is popular at parties. This was that same party. This was a party for, I don't know if you know this really bad TV show from the United States called Magnum P.I. It was super popular and super stupid. It took place in Hawaii, thus all the Hawaiian shirts, and it took place with this actor who became super popular from it, who had a really bad 70s mustache. So everyone came with mustaches and Hawaiian shirts. I do have a lot of photos of people in this state. It's kind of interesting. So the Make Brain Machine, you know, like I said earlier, there are all these companies that have brain machines already available, but they're really expensive. And why spend all that money on something already made when you can make something really inexpensively that you make yourself and it's fun and it really works? So it's also really easy to make because Lady Ada on our website has step-by-step instructions for how to build this thing, pictures and all that stuff. It's really a cool way to start. And people here, I brought kits for people to build this and a few other projects. I brought 50 kits. I thought that would last through the end of the camp, but in fact it lasted half the camp. So people were able to build these things in about 4, 5, 6 hours, even though they had to wait for me because it was so mobbed, and it was tons of fun. I hope the people who did that had as much fun doing it as me. So anyways, brain machines are fun. As you go along the sequence in it, your visual cortex is being stimulated, and it's used to these frequencies internally, but it's not used to them coming from external. So it does what brains always do, tries to make sense out of it, and it can't. So it does what it can, which is hallucinate. It's kind of nice. So another thing, too, I've been meditating since I was 13, and I've gotten a lot of benefit from it, and it's helped me in so many ways, and I wanted to trick people into meditating, because I'm a trickster, compassionate one. In our hectic lives, we are so busy doing this, that, and the other thing, and we so often don't give ourselves time to just relax a little bit, to self-reflect, to trust what's inside of us, to not be so afraid of what's inside of us, and just see what comes up. So anyways, I hope the brain machine can be of benefit that way for some people. Another cool thing with this kit using the Atmel microcontroller, the Atmel microcontroller doesn't need any programmer. You just plug it into a serial port or a USB to serial converter if your computer doesn't have one, and it programs itself. And the software that's available for doing all this is open source and free. And of course, this brain machine that I did is open source hardware and software and free for anyone to use. It uses the blinking lights as well as pulsing sound. They're both in conjunction with one another. And the blinking lights are at those various brainwave frequencies that I showed you a slide of earlier. The binaural beats are more difficult to describe how to do, but they're a pretty simple concept. Beat frequencies are a physical phenomenon. If you have two frequencies that are similar but different, you hear both frequencies and you hear the difference. Brainwave frequencies are too low to hear, actually. So we can't just play the pulsing sound at a brainwave frequency. Binaural beats are a good way to perceive the brainwave frequency in there, and I have a little demonstration here of binaural beats. So hopefully the sound will work. Let's try this one. This is a tone at 200 hertz. But there it is, 200 hertz, and here's one at 211 hertz. It's a little bit different. First I'll play, this one will play 200 hertz, then 211, then both together. So did you all hear the kind of so you like that? So that was that wah 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 sound was at 11 hertz because that's the difference between the two sounds. So binaural beats are very much like beat frequencies, which are a physical phenomena of the waves adding and canceling with each other before your eardrums. But binaural beats are only in your head. And it's not really known why most people, when presented with one frequency in one ear and one frequency in the other, they'll actually perceive those beats. But we just know that a majority of people do perceive that. And since your brain is actively involved in creating that perception, it's a really powerful way for more people to synchronize or entrain their brains to that external frequency. And sound and light together are even more powerful than one or the other. Now, I said before, brain waves from a human brain or a spectrum, it's more difficult for a cheap little microcontroller to do a whole spectrum than to do a simplified model. And for this thing, I just do one brainwave frequency at a time. So I can do beta, I can do alpha, or delta, or theta. Not all of them at once. No mixing of changing of amplitudes of any of them. It's just full beta, full alpha, delta, theta, one at a time. And it seems to work really well. Let's go back to here. Let me just say a little bit about that. In order to stimulate all these different parts of the spectrum of brainwave frequencies in a person's brain, going from, I want to have beta and alpha and theta and delta all together. How do I do that? Well, I start off with a brainwave sequence. You always start off where the person is, which if you're going to do meditation or falling asleep, is the person's awake. So you want to start with beta. And then start putting in some alpha, but I can't do that while that beta's playing, so I do beta for about a minute, and then suddenly alpha comes in. And that's when most people, when you've tried the brainwave machine, you go like, or wow, or holy mother. So it's interesting, and the hallucinations really take off at that point. And then I go back and forth from alpha to beta, but less beta and more alpha each time, and then quit the beta and then start doing a little theta and alpha and do that more back and forth, and more theta, less alpha, but a little bit of beta occasionally just to be sure you don't fall asleep. And then keep doing that until you start pulsing delta and theta. And so that's really what's going on in this thing. And if you look at the open source firmware that I have online, and that's on the Make website, you'll see the table that shows the sequence. And I hope if any of you build this thing that you'll hack that sequence, because it's really fun to play with this stuff. Here's a really bad drawing that I gave to Make magazine before they published the article, and they converted this into a really spiffy graphic. But this is kind of a block diagram of all the things that are happening, most of which I've already talked about. Brain, battery pack powers the whole thing. Speakers, LED, the graphics, of course, look cool because presentation is important. And, with the Atmel thing, this guy up here is a serial port connector. You can do anything you want with that Atmel controlled by your computer with it. It's just, I love that chip. So a circuit board, for people who haven't played with electronics before, is a thing that everything's soldered down to. And just talk a little bit about the firmware. It's really simple. It's just basically a loop. This is actually a little bit different than the way it is now. The top line, it says there's a base frequency at 400 hertz. I halved that, brought it down an octave because it's less annoying. So it's at 200 hertz. The Atmel chip has 2 timers in it. I use one for one ear and one for the other ear. I leave one ear exactly the same all the time, 200 hertz. When I want to change to, when I want to present beta, this one is 200 hertz plus beta frequencies, so 214 hertz, and you perceive the beta, and at the same time this is pulsing at beta frequencies, 14 hertz. When I switch to alpha, this stays at 200 hertz, this goes to 211 hertz for alpha, and you perceive the alpha binaural beat, and the lights change to 11 hertz. So light and sound are always synchronized in this brain machine. So in the loop, it just goes through a brainwave table, and here's an example of the first 2 elements of the brainwave table. Start with B for beta at, and it says 600,000, divide by 10,000 and you get seconds, and I did that for reasons I'm not going to get into now, but that works. So beta for 60 seconds, alpha for 10 seconds, and you can do the same thing for theta and delta. It's a T or a D, and whatever time you like, down to 10,000ths of a second accuracy. So it's just a loop that does just goes through the brainwave table and plays each brainwave element. So that's what I call each line of the table. So after it goes through the whole sequence, I have a 0 here, which tells the firmware loop quit. And then the firmware puts the microcontroller into a low power state called sleep mode. That's really all there is to it. The hardware is really similar to the mini POV kit. Everything from here on is exactly the same as the mini POV, but instead of having all of these be LEDs for waving around and making pictures and words or whatever, not really using these top ones, these 2 LEDs are just like the mini POV, except they're extended around and put in front of your eyes. These, instead of going to LEDs, they're going to headphone jack to speakers, and the pulsing is sound then. And of course the firmware is telling it to do it all at brainwave frequencies. So it's really all there is to it. It uses an internal oscillator. All that stuff on the top is for programming. It's just 6 parts and a serial port connector. So take this opportunity to talk a little bit about meditation. There's a lot of ways to meditate, and you can't do it wrong. So if you're playing with the brain machine or just on your own, cool. There's a lot of ways to do it. Just breathe and pay attention to your breath. If you wander off, just come back to your breath. Or just follow your thoughts. And if you find yourself focusing on one thought, then just remind yourself to just follow whatever thought. And a lot of interesting things can come up that way. Another thing is to focus on a certain kind of thought, like a problem or an intention. You know, what is it you want to accomplish, or what kind of problem you have, like with a roommate or a boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever, and just see if any kind of creative solutions come up. And of course, like with everything else, you can hack it, so make up your own way. You know, what kind of life do you want to live? Live it. So, yeah. I'm going to open it up to some Q&A, but, oh yeah, I have some basic improvements. I'm just going to leave that for the public record and move on. Oh yeah, I forgot to this. So what's it like? A lot of you have tried it, and I'm just going to show you what it's like for some people. Some of these people may look familiar. This is going on for quite a while over the last few days. Yeah, and here's a little thing from Make Magazine website.
Let me show you what this looks like when you put them on. There's the glasses. And here's the headphones. And then let's turn it on. So there you go. That's what you'll hear and see when you put these on. I'm Bree Pettis here with Mitch Altman, and this project is in Make Magazine Volume 10. Go ahead and get it, get the parts, make it on up, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Mitch. Okay, talking about consciousness, as you might have noticed, we've had one pass out. The guy's okay. He's being treated well by our medics. He did not drink enough water. Drink more water. He would need about, I guess it's more than 2 liters, less than 4 liters a day. Not just Mate, not just beer, because these have the opposing effect. Well, so much for this message. Now, do you have any questions? Yes.
Well, hello?
Hi.
Hi, I was wondering, could you record your own brain waves? Do they transmit around your head, or? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, well, electroencephalograms until recently were really expensive laboratory instruments, tens of thousands of dollars long ago, but now you can go to OpenEEG project on the web and you can build your own for about $200 US. It's totally open source hardware and software, and it's really cool. So if you're interested in that, check that out. I'm building my own now, and I'm not done with it yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that as well.
Okay, thank you a lot.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering if you'd considered connecting the output of OpenEEG to the input of one of your brain machines.
Yeah, I definitely have considered that. It would be really cool to have feedback added to this thing. So depending on what you're experiencing, your brainwaves change, which then can feed back to the machine, which changes what external frequencies are going in. And and that'll then affect your brainwaves, et cetera. So maybe we could have it so that you have a target state that you want to be in, like sleep or awake, and it would help you get there really quickly and effectively. That's something I've been thinking of.
Hey Mitch, just a quick observation. You're going to sell the brain machine as a commercial product, and obviously TV Be Gone was a commercial product, but you're teaching people to make it for free as well. So you're my favorite example of what open source is all about, and I think that's really neat.
Thank you.
I think it would be interesting to see what would happen if you hooked one of these up to OpenEEG and then put the glasses on somebody else.
I'll try it.
Yeah. Do you think that there will be a time when the brainwave machine replaces the television, when whole families, instead of getting dumped in front of the television, will sit on the sofa with psychedelic brainwave machines on their head?
I don't think that's going to happen. I was in India a while back, and I certainly didn't intend on, I didn't go to India to go to ashrams, but one thing leads to another, and I meet cool people, and they go to an ashram, and it's like, what the hell, I'll go to an ashram. And I go to this yoga ashram, and it's camp. It's yoga camp for these little kids, and normally I don't like being around 500 little kids, who are 5 years old and screaming, but these weren't screaming. They were doing yoga the whole time rather than baseball and getting beaten up for going out into left field. I don't know if this means anything to someone who isn't American. Anyways, summer camp for many American little geeky kids is total torture. In India, they send their kids to yoga, and they were so happy and calm, and the parents would come by to pick them up after 2 weeks, and they meditate together, and it's so refreshing to have families do something useful together rather than watching TV.
Okay. Have you actually thought about putting those machines to use as a medicinal thing, like for people who suffer from epilepsy or something like this? I mean, you can maybe change the frequencies that are emitted by this thing and maybe help them this way instead of making it worse.
Yeah, that would be really cool. You know, there's been research around all of this. I'm really not a medical researcher, although I am definitely doing a bunch of research on this with me and my friends and friends of friends who are volunteering as guinea pigs. And I actually would like to do some double-blind kind of studies to, as I'm developing my more complex version of the brain machine with the open EEG, measuring things to make it so that people would synchronize really well, a maximum number of people synchronizing really well. So that's like the extent of my kind of research. There are people, there's one guy on the Make magazine blog, a lot of people there have asked questions of me, and I've answered bazillions of questions. It's been really fun. One guy has used his to alleviate headaches that he gets all the time. Just doing low frequency theta and delta has helped him alleviate these headaches that he always gets that are kind of debilitating. So I don't know about epilepsy, if it can help or not. I'm not really up on that. There have been people who said it's alleviated depression, and there was one other physical ailment that I remember or read about, but I can't remember right now. So more research probably could be done by people who are into doing that.
Yeah, hi. I made my first brain machine a while back, about 10 years ago, I think, at a Dutch hackers camp. We used parallel interface there. It's just about the same time I'd also been testing out other more conventional brain machines of the chemical kind. But since then, I've also been reading a lot about how the American intelligence agencies have also been looking at these ways of controlling our minds. And I'm wondering if you've considered that perhaps the brain machine might be used for a negative effect, such as playing Barney music to Guantanamo Bay prisoners, keeping them held in tin boxes.
Yeah, well, the people who run my government always try to think of how to use anything for their own means. And several things that I've worked on in my life have ended up being used in the military, even though there was no military application, or so I thought. You know, the first job I ever had in electronics was making a video game on an Apple II, and it got converted into a killer helicopter training simulator. You know, and when I worked on this really cool video generator back before video cards were available for PCs, for computers, the military bought it so they can make spiffy graphics for selling their fighter bombers to Congress, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's just some of the more bright people, that's where their minds go. And in fact, a lot of leftover research that I made use of along the years for learning about this kind of stuff is left over from the Soviet and American Secret Service agencies. They tried to use this stuff for mind control, and it didn't work because you can't make somebody meditate when they don't want to. What's that? Yeah, well, maybe we could, you know, we would benefit if we could make George W. meditate a little bit, but self-reflection doesn't seem to be his strong suit. So, so yeah, there's been a lot of really good research for that. You can't really make someone's brain do anything you don't want without drugs. So we're pretty safe there. It's between you and your brain.
Have you looked at any of the other electronic brain-altering technologies like transcranial electric stimulation or TMS or RTMS, the magnetic field pulsars?
Yeah, I was at Foo Camp last year, and there's a project, open source project, hardware and software, called OpenStim, which is about all of that. And there's a large number of people guinea pigging themselves to do this. They've been getting some pretty good results, and evidently, according to people I was talking to, in Netherlands they're using this and getting some good results for helping people with all sorts of physical ailments like weak kidneys or people who have trash livers from alcohol or hepatitis, which is kind of bizarre because I don't know how that mechanism could work, but evidently it is working. I'm a little afraid of that myself because brains are very delicate, and we know so little about them. It seems beaming something directly in scares me a little, but there are a lot of people who feel very comfortable with it and really like the experiences they're getting. One thing that's the most promising is that people with severe depression can start living their lives with this kind of stimulation. So, a lot of research is being done, so we'll see what happens.
Is everybody susceptible to this entrainment, or are some people more, can they more easily adjust to the machine?
Yeah, this doesn't work on absolutely everybody. Vast majority of people it does work on. Here, as people tried them, if they were being truthful anyways, there were only a handful of people who said it really wasn't doing anything for them. Most people it seemed to be doing quite a bit. The photos that I showed there were just like 50 or so of the few hundred that I took that were decent exposures, and they weren't hand-chosen for anything in particular, and you probably saw a bunch of those people were smiling. So, I'm really, really amazed at how effective this thing is, because it really is a very crude simplification of all the stuff I've been working on. So it seems our brains are geared towards doing this kind of stuff, and who knows why. We don't even know why brains produce these kind of patterns when you measure them. The only kind of thought that theory that I've heard that makes sense to me is that our brains are tons of parallel processing. So there's a part over here saying, when I hold up my hand, there's a part saying, oh, that's the color of a white person's skin, and oh, there's these little tubes, and oh, they're connected to this thing, and oh, that's a hand. You don't think of it that way. You just, I put this up, and you go, oh, he's holding up his hand. And so the way that all those parallel processes might be communicating so you experience it as a whole is through these brainwave frequencies. So I don't know if that's really true, but that's one theory.
Have you experimented with different colors for the LEDs?
Yes, indeed. The one I'm working on now has 4 different colors. I'm staying away from gamma since I don't know much about it and haven't played with it much, but 4 colors for each of the 4 brainwave types. So red, yellow, green, and blue. I'm getting some pretty good results with it, but I'm not sure if it's because of the colors or because I'm spacing them out in 4 different parts of an eyeball. But when I have the different LEDs, each with their own brainwave type for each eye, it seems to make it easier for the brain to synchronize to it, to entrain to it. And I don't know if the color is part of that or the space. I'll have to experiment a little more. But the colors are cool, so why not use them? People tend to experience all sorts of different colors, even though that's just a blinking red light. People experience patterns, and some people experience more representative kind of things like horses or hearts, or but usually people experience kind of geometric things, but all sorts of colors, not just red, but it's just a red blinking light. It's kind of weird.
Have you also experimented with different frequencies for the left and the right eye?
I haven't played with that. I kind of go by intuition for this stuff as for what I want to play with. You know, my intellect and curiosity make me want to experiment more, so I probably will as I have time. But since my time is so limited because there are so many cool things to do, I've just been going more with my intuition, and my intuition tells me that if everything is synchronized to one thing, that your brain will sync to it better. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's sort of where I've been headed.
Have you tried and looked at the EEG while doing the brain machine?
Once. I met these guys after the Maker Faire who had a robot there who started a robotics conference that turned into a very popular annual robotics conference that is only for robots that mix drinks. And he had at the Maker Faire an example of one that hooked up with OpenEEG with his open source software that he wrote, which is really cool, called Brain Bay. And it would determine the perfect, or the state of your brain, your being, so you'll get the perfect ratio of vermouth to gin for a martini. And that's actually pretty silly, but it was fun. But his brainwave stuff really does work, and I was playing around with it with him with the brainwave machine on, and it really did follow that sequence. And I never knew, that was the first confirmation I had that it's really going on. It felt like it's going on, but how do you know until you measure it? And that's why one of the other reasons I'm building my open EEG machine is to play around with that and make sure people's brains are synchronizing to this more easily.
Hi, I've had a couple of goes on the machines, and they're really cool. But some of the hallucinations that I've had are really, really bright. Kind of spinning white light, kind of forming and stuff. And just on a kind of a safety kind of note, is it safe for the eyes? I mean, is there any possibility of, aren't they brain strain or something? You know, if the hallucinations are really vivid?
No, vivid hallucinations have never hurt anybody as far as I know.
Okay.
So, I mean, what did you think of your hallucinations? Were they scary?
No, they were absolutely fantastic. No, they were great. I mean, you've got to do it. But I was just thinking maybe, because the LEDs that you use are very bright. Have you tried it with different powered LEDs? Could you get a better effect with bigger LEDs or more of them? Kind of like more wraparound kind of things?
Yeah, well, the older machines used, from like the 70s and 80s, used the LEDs of the day, which weren't as bright, so they used many of them. It seems to be more of an effect the brighter they are, but for some people, their eyes are more sensitive, and the bright light is kind of harsh. So it'd probably be good to have an intensity level so it's more comfortable. But it's not harmful. The LEDs I'm using actually aren't super bright. They can't hurt your eyes. They won't burn out any cones or anything. It's not like they're lasers. But it can be bright enough that it's uncomfortable. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed your hallucinations.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And just on a kind of related kind of thing, would it be possible to get more, like another pair of LEDs connected up to a second pair of glasses, so two people could share the experience while, I don't know, say, in Congress?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, try it out.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, last question, because we're running out of time. I guess you'll be around for a while?
I'm not going anywhere.
Sorry?
I am not going anywhere.
Excellent. So people can talk to you after this presentation as well?
Yeah.
Now the final question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Have you actually measured the brain waves while a user is using this kind of machine, just to actually check that the brain is actually synchronizing and it's not just an illusion by the user?
Yeah, like I said in the question before, that guy with the drink mixing robot who does the brainwave stuff, I actually had confirmation that it at least worked for me. I haven't tried doing that with anyone else. So yeah, there's been a lot of research with this stuff, and it's definitely shown that a lot of people's brains do synchronize to these external lights and sounds. So not everybody, but most people. And it's a lot of fun. So try it out for yourself, see what it's like. It's your brain, use it well.